Hey, how's it going in this video? I'm gonna be taking a look at what's happening in Panama with regards to some of the mining operations, and there's one of the biggest or largest open pit copper mine currently, and they have recently signed some contracts. Let's take a look at in this video what's happening there. Overall, it's very recent events, if anything. So I don't know how accurate some of the information that I might be able to access is, since all information that I might be able to access it can be very one-sided, right? So I'm not necessarily understanding the contract myself. I haven't read the contract. It would be great to have access to some of those contracts, and perhaps put things into comparison. I have seen some of the contracts in other regions, right? So, for example, in Africa, some of the contracts there where they potentially would offer perhaps $2 instead of market value. Sometimes it could be 300. So some of the contracts can look like that, right? But again, I don't know all the conditions within the contract and all the terms. Perhaps they might offer other things within the contract, but face value, some of those contracts 90 pages, right? So, but in terms of putting things into perspective, the recent contracts, right? So perhaps $2 a market value for some of the materials up there, and some of the companies would rather perhaps there's other incentives, right? But it's at the same market value. Other companies would sell the same materials for $300 or so, $200 or whatever. So that seems I don't know. I don't know. So perhaps there's other things that they might offer within the same contracts, perhaps security contracts, other types of resources, right? But I don't know. I don't know. This is how it was. Some of the examples up there, what the different markets can look like. Let's take a look at what's happening in Panama and some of the information that I was able to find and access. But again, it's very recent things that are happening, so not necessarily all the information up there is accurate. Uh, some headlines, right? Panama is on fire, I guess. Let's get I guess it's so the people would take it serious, but is it really? So I have a lot of uh, people within unrest about everything what's happening there. Perhaps some of those organizations or people or governments should pay more attention, if anything. Not necessarily things are on fire. I hope things are not on fire. Unions on strike. Schools classes are cancelled. Workers, teachers, and indigenous groups are in streets. Would that be classified as social workers? Perhaps that would be paid by governments, right? So not necessarily those people who are getting paid by a government. So government need to raise more of its capital, right? So if government up there would increase prices of some of the natural resources, some of those social workers perhaps would receive more, or government would be able to pay more, or pensions, social workers, or schools would improve infrastructure, if anything. So perhaps this is was the real intention, what I'm really trying to read between the lines, right? People are protesting in the government's approval of negotiated contract with Canadian mining firm for operating of Central America largest open pit copper mine. Why it says Canadian? Perhaps because some of those companies are changing names constantly, and that's why. So if anything, this government for some reason need to get involved. But either way. So perhaps they overseeing and managing supply chain, right? And they're looking to have access to copper. And they currently have some of the contracts with one of the largest mining open mining pits of copper, like I said, myself included. I have done some research to understand how much of the prices of copper, electricity wiring, transferring of energy, potentially would increase some of those prices. Hopefully not. We can find better way of moving energy from point A to point B, not necessarily only with copper. So hopefully some of the prices would go down. Would need to invest more research and development. Other than that, perhaps some of those natural resources and some of the access to copper most likely will increase. There is a huge demand for copper, if anything, any takeaways, right? There is a huge demand. I don't know if that demand is reflected with some of those contracts, or perhaps what kind of contracts that people enter, or people who should oversee those contracts and what kind of contracts they find themselves in, but are not those contracts not necessarily reflecting the current demand, market demand for copper. Either way. So perhaps that's where pushback is coming from. But either way, based on the natural resources, as well as there's a lot of issues. There's a lot of issues with water replenishment. Either way, so there's a lot of issues, right? If, either way, let's cover it in more detail. I would like to pull up some numbers, but again, I'm not entirely sure how accurate those numbers might be. November 1st, battery Canadian mining company First Quantum Minerals, AFMTO, is branching for a rocky road ahead of Panama's move to strike down their contract to operate one of the world's largest copper mines. Panama shocked the decision on Sunday to call a binding vote on where the scrap the mine's recent struck 20 years contract paired sell off Vancouver-based First Quantum shares. Investors widened out about 8.35 billion of Canadian dollars. That's equals to about 6 billion, or 48% from the company's market value this week, registering doubts about the First Quantum ability to operate in one of the top performing mines up there. I have covered a number of mining companies up there. Usually there might be a bid, right? So usually there is a competitive process of what company might be able to come in and extract natural resources. If anything, perhaps Panama should rise enough resources and perhaps themselves they can do it instead of getting other people involved. Like if they cannot do that themselves. I don't know if that makes sense. Then they're not necessarily get the other companies involved. If anything, and the takeaways from this video, I have covered recently about 3 or 4 different companies who are extracting those resources, and then there's but again, if they would extract those resources, who gonna purchase? But again, that's sometimes just a matter of time, right? There's a lot of names, and I won't even mention any of those names, but either way, the mine, which accounts for approximately 5% of country's GDP and supports more than 49,000 direct and indirect jobs, is Panama's second largest revenue source after Panama's Channel. Perhaps worth taking a look at Panama Channel as well, with some of the crises that they currently have with fresh water resources and how Panama Channel is being refilled with water. But either way, we're looking at this. So it has a large impact, right, of if anything, on the country's GDP and how companies' economy, how countries generating a lot of capital potentially. If anything, perhaps they can start doing everything themselves instead of having other government countries or companies who are operating from other governments coming in and extracting some of these resources. The mine, which opened in 2019, accounts for 1% of global copper production as cost 11 billion to build. It is considered important to global energy transition because of its long life of the last 20 years, with the copper being important metal in making electric vehicle batteries. Not necessarily limited to those batteries. But overall, when it comes to electricity and the transfer of electricity, so it has a big impact, right? And with the prices, potentially the supply and demand, right? If it's just perhaps 1%, and we're talking about world's largest open pit mine, but there's a lot of potential there. I don't know if some of people understand about how much money we're potentially talking about. There's a lot of money, and there's a $11 billion investment there. So I don't know. Hopefully, there could be agreement made so people who invested they could receive their money back, and perhaps the country consider running its own operations. People out there who are interested in learning more, I have published a book. In this book, I'm focusing a lot on staying healthy, focusing on some of those areas, what would be required to do so. That would be your eating habits, working out, lifting weights, as well as resting periods. In this book, I'm covering everything from beginner's level, so that's something where I'm usually starting with. From there, I'm progressing and sharing more complex ideas, the way how to think or approach fitness, lifting weights, working out. Some of those areas I'm looking to address to help people where to begin, how to develop your own habits, as well as longevity, and potentially how you can improve your well-being, if anything. So I'm looking to address that and share this book with as many people as I possibly can. You can find this book in the description below, as well as top retailers has it. Panamas are set to elect new president and renew the seats of Congress at local government in May 2024. Good, so there's going to be some actions taken, perhaps that current whatever was elected government not necessarily reflect of what actually is happening within the government. If those people see what I'm seeing with the current trends of industry, well, potentially government have not necessarily entered the contract that would be the best for the people, and otherwise I can't see why so many people would be in the streets, right, protesting the current contract. But perhaps that was just within the interest of a handful of people, not necessarily what would be best for a government. So government not reflected, people decided perhaps we need to elect a new government, which is great. That's how democracy should work, or should be within the interest of the handful of people. Either way. That's my own observation, if anything. I wish that I mentioned that before. People would extract on the natural resources is some of those trends up there where people would potentially would earn only 10% of value for if even 10% for value of the resources, right? Perhaps it might be worth giving them a phone call if I can purchase everything very cheaply, I guess, up there, which is great, I guess. But that's not necessarily best. It's free market economics, but not necessarily best for the people. Perhaps it's best for just a handful of people. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.